Well, Donald Trump was back in New York for his civil fraud trial, of course, relating to the Trump Organization's business fraud. And the Judge Engoron, has already found that to be the case. He's liable for the fraud that was engaged in. Now, damages are being decided on. And Trump has this routine, Josiah, every time he shows up to court in New York, and I'm sure this will apply to his other trials as well, where at break or before he goes in, or at any chance that he can, he goes in front of all of the journalists and reporters and just starts ranting. And this time was no exception. Take a look.
They said the accounting fraud, and the fraud was on behalf of the judge and the attorney general, who took assets and made them numbers that were fraudulent. As an example, Mar-a-Lago. As an example, Doral in Miami. As an example, 40 Wall Street. And others, where they cut the values to a level that nobody's even imagined. You take a look at Doral and look at the numbers that we're talking about for Doral. But the most obvious of all, because of the fact that people know it, is when you value a place like Mar-a-Lago at $18 million when it's worth anywhere from 50 to 100 times that amount.
It's interesting, Josiah, every single time he goes to court, it seems like he inflates Mar-a-Lago. It's twice this, it's 5.6 billion, right?
No, he seems to add like a zero or some sort of factor every time he's in front of the camera. I didn't watch this, the entire coverage of the trial, so for all I know, this is what he said in the morning, and it's 1,000 times by the end of the day. I wouldn't be surprised if it elevates in a matter of 6 hours.
So just to contextualize all this, we're watching the presumptive nominee. Trump's going to be most likely the nominee for the Republican Party for president of the United States. And here's him next to me in court in New York. And he's going to be looking like that a lot more over the course of the next few months in trial after trial. But coming up are his criminal trials, in relation to two of them being him trying to overthrow our democratic process to keep him in the White House, blocking the peaceful transfer of power, mishandling the most sensitive secrets of the United States government being one of them, and then his falsifying business records with the payment to a porn star in the party of family values. And that guy, 4 indictments, 2 impeachments, civilly liable rapist, engaged in business fraud. That's the guy, Josiah, that they're going to go with.
Well, you're missing, too, the recent Colorado court held that he was an insurrectionist as a matter of opinion. Like, not only that, January 6th was, by legal definition, an insurrection, but that Donald Trump himself was an insurrectionist. So he's basically, I mean, I'm trying to think of what crime by this point he's either not been credibly accused of or prosecuted for. He's like the Renaissance man when it comes to federal crimes.
Truly. Next clip.
I said this is a great company, one of the best. I think they said the best company that they deal with. And this is what I have to go through, fraud from a fraudulent attorney general that valued a incredible club in Florida that's worth 50 to 100 times more than they put down. But they fraudulently valued it low. This woman should be under investigation for what she did. She's a disgrace.
A pretty powerful response, Josiah. Oh, you're accusing me of fraud? You're guilty.
You're the
of
fraud.
The fraud. You should be investigated.
Yeah, that's exact. I mean, the thing you have to remember is that Donald Trump, you know, people talk a lot about President Biden's age. And we tend to forget that Donald Trump is of comparable age. There are only 3 years separating these two men. And I think part of it is because Donald Trump is so petulant and childlike that we forget that he's a 77, almost 78-year-old man. And if you have any doubts, you need only look to those responses that he just gave. It's 10 to 100 times more valuable than what she did. I'm the fraud, you're the fraud. I'm under investigation, you should be under investigation. All he does is just regurgitate whatever is thrown at him. It's a complete lack of creativity in terms of his excuses, in terms of his explanations. All he does is just take in information, change the name, and regurgitate it. So sad.
And he's currently being prosecuted for election interference. And that's the term he's decided to go with in terms of what Fani Willis is guilty of. It's all so ridiculous. Just one more clip to play for you.
Into our country. This is what's happened to our country. We're a failing nation because of stuff like this. You heard things today that nobody knew because I was a private company. I am a private company.
We're a failing nation because the law is being upheld. I do want to make sure that we always bring these conversations about Trump back to the important thing to remember. He is a buffoon. This is ridiculous. He is incoherent, ranting. But also, he could become, if we don't do everything that we can and vote against it, the next president. If people don't understand what we're about to go through right now about him and his intention, all the rage you're seeing from him here, all of the victimhood that he's expressing in terms of how his followers see him and how he sees himself, he wants to channel that into a retribution presidency if he gets the chance. And Josiah and I were talking before recording today about just recently what we're learning and being reminded about in terms of that very fact. Josiah, do you want to break some of that down?
Sure. So, and listen, I'll say this. I think, you know, when we're talking about this particular trial, it is easy. If you look at it in a vacuum, you think, okay, a corrupt billionaire, the state's coming down on him hard, rightly so, for committing fraud. But as you said, you can't compartmentalize Trump that way. He's certainly not going to compartmentalize his very hard feelings about the situation. He said, as we discussed in a previous clip, that he wants to investigate the Attorney General of New York. She's the fraud. I'm the fraud. She's the fraud. He intends very much to get even in his mind. And we've had recent news to that effect. Trump has said on Truth Social that he wants to come down in particular on MSNBC because it's the most progressive mainstream news outlet, which tends to criticize him the most. Where's the MAGA pro-free speech crowd there? They don't care.
The government should, quote, come down hard, end quote, on MSNBC was his words.
Absolutely. But as long as it's Trump's government, then the right wing and the Republicans don't care at all. You also have two close Trump allies, Steve Bannon and Kash Patel, who were both members of the Trump administration, and recent reporting has indicated that they may even have cabinet-level positions in the next Trump administration. Steve Bannon said, listen, this is not rhetoric. When we say that we're coming after you guys, this is not rhetoric. And Kash Patel, in the same interview, said, yeah, whether criminally or civilly, we'll figure it out, but we're coming after you in the government, in the media, if you were part of the conspiracy to elect Joe Biden. And he's finding new and elaborate ways in a variety of mediums and settings to tell the American people just how much of a fascist he is. So when we watch these clips, yes, it is kind of funny because he's almost like a 30 Rock character or a Parks and Rec character or a Veep character. But he's also probably the most dangerous man alive. And that danger will manifest itself in the state coming down on his enemies. If he wins the presidential election, like you said, Luke, he stands a pretty good chance of winning the presidency right now.
Yeah, and one thing just to add on to all of that, Josiah, is can we not forget that he called for the termination of the Constitution? It's something that I've brought up to, as I've shown the clips of on the show, many Trump supporters, and none of them even know that happened. None of them know that, as you just talked about there, he said the government should come down hard on a media outlet that he doesn't like. Most of them have no idea about things like the fake elector scheme or what he wanted Mike Pence to do in blocking the certification of the election. So it's disheartening to know that, yes, we have to convince people to stop being okay with this behavior. But first, we have to make sure people know. And so I've encouraged my followers to try to do that. Anytime you're having a political conversation, oh my gosh, the Trump clip, what, did he mean it when he said he wants to be a dictator on day one, or did he not? Bring it back to, let's go through what he tried to do in 2020 and 2021 after he lost the presidential election, because that was him showing us he doesn't respect our democracy or the rule of law. He didn't care about the will of the people. He wanted to disenfranchise millions of voters to keep himself the president, as he's now being prosecuted for through these various schemes like the fake elector scheme that his followers don't even know about, and so many liberals don't even know the specifics of. And then that's what he did last time he was president. Now he's saying, I want retribution. I've already shown you I don't care about the rule of law. I don't care about a democratic process. I don't care about our institutions. And he's joking about being a dictator on day one. He's promising to lock up his political enemies. We're getting reporting that he plans to invoke the Insurrection Act to crush demonstrations against him and install loyalists across the government so that he can do whatever he wants. There's no pushback, and on it goes.
Yeah, and so well, what's funny, I just wanted to say, you mentioned the point about, pointing out to liberals, reminding progressives, reminding those of us on the left, that is also a Herculean chore. I consider myself as legitimately anti-Trump as a person can possibly be, Luke. And I have finite bandwidth. I have finite RAM up here, finite memory. If you hadn't mentioned the fact that Trump called for the suspension of the Constitution, it would not have immediately been recalled to me, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, you almost have to have like some sort of AI or some sort of ongoing interactive database to catalog in real time all the crazy, deranged, authoritarian things that Trump has said. And it doesn't help that the media for the longest time, including the mainstream media, who probably deep down don't want Trump elected, but for one reason or another, and we can speculate as to why, they don't treat it with the solemnity that it deserves. You need to take this seriously. You shouldn't take things for granted. The fact that Trump's an idiot, not like the Machiavellian schemers that we're so used to in pop culture, the great comic book villains or whatever, it doesn't matter. He is still dangerous. He has quite a few cultists behind him. That is what much of MAGA is, where there is no limiting principle. There is no accountability. He just said in the clip that you played that we are a failing nation, and you said it yourself. He thinks we're a failing nation, and so do his supporters, because he's being held accountable for crimes. He's even said, Luke, in recent court cases, that he's entitled to absolute presidential immunity, even when he's no longer president, for things that he said and did while he was president. It is the ultimate legal ensconcement of this idea. You remember when he said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote? He's tried to put pen to paper and litigate that. If I do a terrible thing as president, or if I say a terrible thing as president, not only when I am president am I above the law, but when I'm no longer president, I am above the law because I did those things while I was president, therefore it doesn't count. It is just an ethos of unaccountability with this
Every time I hear somebody say, and Trump says it a lot, they indicted a former president. You can't indict a former president. You can't indict. Yes, you can, if there's evidence of crimes. I genuinely...
And you should. And you should. If they're, yeah.
Part of the two-tier justice system that exists and existed even more before now was the fact that powerful, influential people like Donald Trump wouldn't be held accountable even when there was evidence of crimes. Powerful people got away with things that people who weren't powerful didn't. Trump being held accountable legally is actually that finally not being the case, at least in his situation. And so they talk about this two-tier justice system. It's the opposite of what they think that it is, or not the opposite. It's different. They think it's Democrat and Republican is powerful and not powerful. And it really is stunning that a party who at least tried to brand themselves as the only party that really stands for the Constitution and really stands for the rule of law and law and order, the second their cult leader is the one being subjected to those things, or his interests are now violating those things.
They're like, not like that.
Ew,
no, we didn't mean that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We meant for everybody else, not for Trump. And I think one of the reasons when people argue against his indictments, I rarely hear in right-wing media, here's the specifics of the indictment. Here's why it's not legitimate. Here's what they're saying they have in terms of evidence. Here's why I know they either don't have it or it wouldn't justify this sort of legal accountability, is because I don't think they actually know exactly why these are illegitimate charges, other than it's Trump.
Yeah, they dismiss them. They dismiss them out of hand. I mean, and one thing that you and I have in common, because we think it's useful and it's instructive, is when we have conversations with right wingers and they have an opinion on the treatment of Trump, it's always important to try to put the shoe on the other foot. Okay, so imagine it's Barack Obama saying, or Joe Biden saying, "I'll be a dictator day one of term two." How would Fox News react? How would Trump supporters react? How would they react if you and I said, well, guys, Joe Biden was just joking? Would they say, oh, okay, fair enough? No, of course they would say that is
They called him
entirely
Hitler because there were red lights in his speech.
Yeah, and he had his fists like this. Yeah, right. I mean, it was the end of the world. Or how about in 2015 or 2016 when Barack Obama said, you know, I'm term locked, but if I was able to run for a third term, I think I'd win. Fox News clutched their pearls about that. Ben Shapiro wrote op-eds that Obama was a fascist at one of the State of the Union addresses. To me, it's vital to point out the double standard and to get people to comment in real time. Because it's important to be like, listen, have you thought about the standard you're setting? And would you find it acceptable if the shoe were on the other foot? And we both know that if Trump had managed to get Hillary Clinton indicted or any of his political opponents during his first term, and it wasn't for lack of trying. We have reports that Trump did try to pressure officials in his administration to go after Hillary Clinton and Obama and whatever. And he called on Bill Barr during the 2020 election to indict Joe Biden. If that happened, Trump supporters and Fox News anchors and right-wing commentators would be cheerful. They would be delighted. This is accountability. This is proof that, you know, no one is above the law. Good on Trump for doing it. But the second that Trump becomes a target, a legitimate target of the law enforcement system, well, then it's just really inappropriate to go after a former leader.
Josiah, well said. Where can my viewers find you?
You can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics, one word. Luke, I appreciate the collaboration.